Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I am your host, Jim Chapman, and we are back with an emergency podcast of bad teachers, making this the fourth episode this week. We have brought you, of course, Tuesday, we dropped part 3 of War Machine, part of that Bad Boy series. Wednesday, we dropped an episode of Bad Teachers. And Thursday, we brought you the testimony of Buster Murdaugh and featured the Murdaugh series. Before we get into it, if you are a Patreon celebrity subscriber, you also have a bonus episode waiting for you on the Patreon page titled The Teflon John, and covering the scandals of Louisiana political figure David Vitter. That will absolutely blow your mind, so go check that out if you're a Patreon member. Incidentally, if you're not a Patreon member, we offer all kinds of perks you cannot get anywhere else. Commercial-free early releases, bonus episodes, tons of files on the cases we discuss, and even quarterly gifts. Check us out at patreon.com/exposedpodcastfiles. So, what sparked today's emergency drop? Well, all of you, quite frankly, ever since this story broke just really a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I have been getting messages through Facebook saying, cover this story. Now, initially, I was going to hold off until more information came out, but y'all want to hear me talk about this one, and my listeners get what they want. So today I'm bringing you to Brevard County, Florida, and I'm going to tell you about 2 bad teachers. One of them being an elementary school principal, the other one being a 3rd grade teacher at that same school. And the first one we're going to discuss is Miss Elizabeth Hill Brodigan. Now, Miss Brodigan, who is 47, very well respected principal, and even back in her teaching days, was someone that excelled at what she did. She had been a teacher for over 2 decades, honored many times with various awards, including receiving Teacher of the Year for Brevard County, which is no small feat by itself. Brevard County is very large, huge school district, 111 schools, and over 74,000 students. You're talking about over 5,000 teachers in this district. So think how much she must have stood out to be selected as the best teacher in that district. It's pretty amazing, quite honestly. The other bad teacher involved in this mess is Carly Anderson, 45, who teaches 3rd grade at the school where Brodigan is the principal. And that school, incidentally, is Roosevelt Elementary School in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Now, she's also a very experienced teacher. She's been teaching since 2006, almost 20 years, with 9 of those years being in the Cocoa Beach area, where she taught kindergarten for 5 years, 1st grade for 2 years, and 3rd grade for 2 years. Now, I did manage to get my hands on the actual arrest warrant. So let's get into the evening of January 19th of 2025 and what went down that it seems like everybody is talking about. So according to the warrant, and y'all, I have reviewed countless warrants, and in the incident report, there's, your standard stuff, height, weight, age, etc. And on Miss Brodigan's incident report, it caught my eye that her height is listed as 5'6", and where you put the weight, it says verbatim, not known and unlikely will ever be known. That's exactly what it says. Now, I guess they asked her and that was her response, but that was a new one for me. Never seen that. So I'm going to read directly from the probable cause statement, and then we're going to discuss it. And before I get into it, it's important to mention, although the principal is the principal of an elementary school, these were not elementary school kids. These were all high school age kids. I'm not saying that's much better, but if you just go by the headlines, it totally leads you to believe that these were like 10 and 11-year-old fifth graders. Also, this was not a party she specifically threw. It was a party her two sons threw, involving mostly 15 to 18-year-olds. Again, a lot of problems here, but I needed to provide some clarification because the incident reports, in my opinion, are not very well written, especially the first one I'm going to cover. There's two written by two separate officers. And here's the first one. And this one was written by Corporal Brown. And it says, on January 19th of 2025 at approximately 8:45 p.m., I and additional officers responded to, and it gives the address, in Cocoa Beach, Florida, regarding numerous complaints of noise, alcohol, and narcotics abuse. Upon officers' arrival, multiple individuals, approximately 100, were observed at the residence owned by the suspect, Elizabeth Hill Brodigan, participating in an open house party. I spoke with the defendant, who I know, via landline, and informed her of the complaints received. She said she would respond to the location to handle the issue as she was down the street. She inquired about the noise ordinance and explained she would have the music stopped by 10 p.m. Additional officers and I responded again at 9:24 p.m. Now let's stop right there for a second. They get called out at 8:45 p.m. for noise, alcohol, and narcotics use. Yet they speak to her and they apparently left. No arrest, didn't stop the party, nothing. That's how I'm reading it in the warrant. I wasn't there. I have no direct knowledge, but I just read you exactly what he wrote. Then he said, additional officers and I responded again at 9:24 p.m. So you're talking about 45 minutes later, after receiving another report regarding a house party, noise, and alcohol consumption. Before I responded, I conducted a traffic stop on a vehicle where the driver advised he was leaving the house party and was scared because a juvenile at the party was showing off a firearm. However, no juveniles were located with weapons. The same juvenile also confirmed the house, pointing out the suspect and her specific job title at the elementary school. Officer Mock spoke with the suspect as she approached the vehicle. She advised she would shut down the party. Later, I offered to speak with the juveniles who were in the suspect's backyard, but she declined to allow me to do that. At this point, the suspect knew about the event as she was home and declined law enforcement assistance to end the event. Now, I got a little problem with that. You've got reports of a juvenile with a gun, and basically the homeowner says, well, you can't go in my backyard, and you don't go back there, and you use that as an excuse. Sounds to me like you've got probable cause. Then there's a big time gap in his report. It goes from 9:24 p.m. to 11:41 p.m. And it says at 11:41 p.m., I located a juvenile in the grass in the front of the residence, intoxicated and vomiting. I contacted the fire department to evaluate the juvenile. The juvenile was later turned over to his mother after I contacted her. At 11:18 p.m., the suspect is seen walking out of the house toward the driveway, standing in front of a vehicle and looking in my direction. She did not inquire as to why I was there or what was happening. At 11:19, she walks back inside the residence. While I was with the juvenile, another officer conducted a traffic stop on a vehicle operated by another juvenile with other juveniles in the car, where an arrest was made for DUI. The juveniles were coming from the party at the residence. The suspect had control of the residence and allowed an open party to take place where alcoholic beverages were consumed by minors at the residence and failed to take reasonable steps to prevent the possession or consumption of the alcoholic beverage. Now, fortunately, the incident report I'm going to cover now from the second officer provides much more clarification. So I'm going to read that for you. This incident report was written by Officer Rosa Emilio. And it says, the defendant, identified as Carly Anderson. So now we're getting into Carly Anderson, of Cocoa Beach did commit the offense of child neglect when she failed to provide a child with the care, supervision, or services necessary to maintain the child's physical and mental health, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Officers responded to the house on Cocoa Beach, Florida, in reference to an open house party. Upon arrival, officers observed multiple vehicles parked in the front of the residence, stretching down the roadway and into the middle of the road. Officers made contact with juveniles at the residence who claimed they didn't know whose party it was. Yeah, right. Corporal Brown knew who the homeowner was and called her, Elizabeth Hill Brodigan. Corporal Brown told Elizabeth there was an open house party at her residence involving juveniles drinking alcohol and using marijuana. Elizabeth told Officer Brown that she was down the street and would take care of it. Officers then cleared the scene and began to conduct traffic stops on vehicles leaving the area. During the traffic stops, multiple juveniles were located inside the vehicles, and they were seen wearing the same clothing from the, quote, white lie party that was held. Officers were eventually called back to the same residence by neighbors who were again complaining of the open house party. This was at 9:24. The complaints also mentioned that juveniles were seen walking toward the residence through other people's yard and were yelling obscenities at them. When officers arrived on the scene, there was still an active house party happening at the residence. Elizabeth Hill Brodigan approached one of the officers as they drove by and told him that she was shutting down the party. The police department also received a third call complaining about the house party while officers were on the scene. The police department then received a call from what sounded like a juvenile. This was at 10:28 p.m. The unknown juvenile male advised there were people shooting guns at a nearby skate park and then drove to Sidney Fisher Park. The juvenile then advised the people at the park were conducting satanic activity and had someone at gunpoint. Officers responded to the park, and guess what? You could see this coming, couldn't you? The call was unfounded. So some juvenile called the cops, said there's people in the park holding people at gunpoint and they're conducting satanic rituals. All the fucking cops leave the residence to go check on that call. Of course, I mean, certainly you have to do that, but I could see that one coming a mile away personally. So that kind of answered why they left. Officers then returned to the area of the house party, and most of the party goers had left. I bet they did. That was the whole point of the call. Another sergeant observed a vehicle run the stop sign at the south end of the road and almost strike his police car. This was at 11:31 p.m. The sergeant conducted a traffic stop on this vehicle and discovered two intoxicated female juveniles in the vehicle. The juvenile that was driving was arrested for DWI, and the passenger was cited for being in possession of marijuana. The juvenile that was arrested provided a blood alcohol level of 0.11. Both juveniles were dressed in white lie attire, which was the attire of the night, right? While the sergeant was on this traffic stop, Corporal Brown found a male juvenile vomiting and shaking in Elizabeth Hill Brodigan's front yard. This was at 11:41 p.m. Corporal Brown determined that the juvenile required medical attention and had Brevard County Fire Rescue respond. Once fire rescue arrived on the scene, Elizabeth Hill Brodigan walked out of her residence and stood at the top of her driveway. Elizabeth Hill Brodigan then walked inside and turned off all the lights in the front of her house. How about that shit? So the fire department shows up to work on this kid who is obviously so drunk he's puking in the front yard, and she goes and turns her freaking lights off, her outside lights. Fire rescue began evaluating the juvenile. Corporal Brown called the juvenile's mother, who advised she was coming to the police department to pick up her son. The juvenile was determined to be intoxicated and was placed in the back seat of Corporal Brown's marked patrol vehicle as the defendant, who is known to be a third grade teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, began to walk up and berate the fire department. Corporal Brown approached the defendant as she was yelling at the fire department. And y'all, they're talking about Carly Anderson right here. The defendant advised she was upset because a child was being put, quote, in a machine, unquote, and stated that she was a teacher. The defendant told Corporal Brown that she was hanging out at the party while pointing at Elizabeth Hill Brodigan's house. Corporal Brown told the defendant that there were 200 kids at this residence drinking. The defendant interrupted Corporal Brown and yelled that she knew that already. The defendant's speech was slowed and slurred. She also had mood swings between angry and calm multiple times during this brief interaction. Corporal Brown then stated in his body camera footage that he could smell the odor of alcoholic beverage emanating from the defendant's person, and she acknowledged that she had been drinking. Eventually, Corporal Brown told the defendant to go away. That way he could bring the juvenile back to his mother. On January 20th, so the next day, I spoke with the defendant on the phone. Without any questioning, the defendant advised she had no participation in what took place at the house party. The defendant advised she had a friend and told me that I knew who that friend was. And then in quotation marks, it says referring to Elizabeth Hill Brodigan, and that friend invited her out for a drink. The defendant advised her friend was sober the whole time because she only had one drink. The defendant then advised her friend's kid did what he did, quote. The defendant then advised Corporal Brown that he knows who she is because she teaches at Roosevelt. The defendant then advised that her children were not at the party and she does not participate in underage drinking. I asked the defendant if she would be willing to meet with me and provide a sworn statement. The defendant said, "Hell no," quote unquote, and advised that she wanted no part of this. The defendant then told me that our phone call better not be recorded. The defendant was then advised that everything I do is recorded. The defendant then stated that it was okay because she did not say any names. Later that day, I also spoke with Elizabeth Hill Brodigan on the phone. I asked Elizabeth if she would be willing to provide a sworn statement regarding the incident. Elizabeth advised she would meet me at 3:30 that day. At 3:38, I called Elizabeth back because she had not yet come to the police department. Elizabeth advised she was not willing to speak with me anymore. On January 21st, 2 days later, Detective Olson and I began interviewing multiple students from different schools who attended the party. The students we interviewed were identified via multiple body camera videos from traffic stops and encounters at the party. All of the students who agreed to speak with us advised that there were over 100 students at Elizabeth Hill Brodigan's house for this party. Most students knew that Elizabeth was the principal of Roosevelt Elementary and advised that parties like this happened at least once or twice a month. Students also advised they arrived as early as 6:45 p.m. and Elizabeth was having students help make preparations for the party. At that time, alcohol was ready and available in multiple red and white coolers inside the residence. Students also advised that Elizabeth made no attempt to start the party at any point and advised that she seemed okay with what was happening. Students advised that there was marijuana being used at the party as well. One white male juvenile with a mask on was seen taking videos with a firearm at the party and pointing it at the person recording the video. The firearm was described by one student as a Beretta. The party was advertised via Snapchat and was hosted by Elizabeth's two sons. The students also advised there were fights at the party. One fight was described as follows: a student punched another student who was autistic. A Cocoa Beach wrestler then slapped the student that had punched the autistic student. This altercation was recorded, but none of the students interviewed could provide that video. I interviewed the wrestler who admitted that he slapped another student in the street at the party. The student that was hit was confirmed to not be autistic, but does have a learning disability. Some students advised that Elizabeth Brodigan was in the residence during the party and had told her son to stop the party. Elizabeth's son ignored her, and Elizabeth took no further action to stop the party. I also attempted to contact Elizabeth's husband, and I won't list his name, Mr. Brodigan, who is also the homeowner. Elizabeth answered the phone and advised he was unable to speak with me. Mr. Brodigan called me back and advised later that he did not wish to speak with me. On January 24th of 2025, the defendant was seen driving her vehicle out of a parking lot of Roosevelt Elementary School. A traffic stop was conducted on her vehicle as she pulled into her residence. The defendant was instructed to exit her vehicle and she was placed under arrest. The defendant was then transported to the Cocoa Beach Police Department for post-Miranda interview. The defendant refused to speak with me and was transported to the Brevard County Jail. So that was that report, which was much clearer than the first. And as you can tell, this is all just a freaking disturbing mess. You got teens fighting other teens, children smoking weed, playing with a gun. One left the party and was arrested for DUI, and another child passes out on the grass. And how about Brodigan's husband's response? You can tell he wants nothing to do with this shit. And as far as I can tell, was not even there. No mention of him in the report as being there. He may not have even known about it until all of this went down. So I did some more digging in, and the Brodigans, they're a wealthy family, nearly $1 million home, according to online values. And the husband works a pretty good job. But how about the lack of control over her own kids in her house? Quoting that report, witnesses said she went inside and told him to stop the party, and he totally ignored her. And she took no further action. I mean, what the hell? Are you kidding me? So it's interesting and even shocking to me that neither Brodigan nor Anderson were arrested that night. They weren't arrested till 5 days later. It was not until January 24th they were arrested. But when they were, police issued this news release. It reads, 2 arrests made in an underage house party. On January 19th, 2025, the Cocoa Beach Police Department responded to a residence in reference to a house party. Upon arrival, officers observed over 100 juveniles at the residence in matching t-shirts, many of who were consuming alcohol that was later learned to be available in coolers at the residence. The homeowner was identified as Roosevelt Elementary School principal Elizabeth Hill Brodigan. While officers were investigating the party, a juvenile was located on the front lawn experiencing an alcohol-related medical event. The juvenile was so heavily intoxicated that the fire rescue had to respond to treat him. During this time, the homeowner, Hill Brodigan, was seen by officers in the driveway of her residence, turning off the outside lights and entering her residence, causing fire rescue to use auxiliary lighting on their vehicle to treat the juvenile. Additionally, a traffic stop was conducted near the residence, resulting in the arrest of a juvenile driver for DUI. Additionally, an intoxicated female identified as Carly Anderson approached officers on the scene, identifying herself as a teacher that had been at the party. It was later discovered she was, in fact, a teacher at Roosevelt Elementary School. In the days that followed, Cocoa Beach police detectives interviewed numerous juveniles and parents. An arrest warrant was obtained for Elizabeth Hill Brodigan for child neglect, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and holding an open house party. Carly Anderson was additionally arrested and charged with child neglect and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And then it says, if you have any questions, call them. So both ladies are arrested. They both bond out and they are awaiting their court dates. Now, in these cases, most of the charges are misdemeanors. However, there is one felony each for them, and that is for the child neglect charge. But don't be surprised. As a matter of fact, I'd almost guarantee this. Their attorneys are going to likely work out a deal where that charge is brought down to a misdemeanor. So at the end of the day, after all of this, I don't have a crystal ball, but looking at as many of these types of cases as I've looked at over the years, likely fines and community service is what these ladies are going to get at the end of the day. But we'll move on. As soon as all this comes out, the school, of course, they do what you'd think they do. They place them on administrative leave, saying, "We are extremely troubled by these accusations and are fully cooperating with the Cocoa Beach Police Department. Our commitment to student safety remains our top priority." But some really strange comments came out from the school board chairman when he spoke to Fox 35 News about this. And I want you to hear this clip.
This isn't anything new. When we have thousands of employees, things happen. I've read the police report, and it seems that it was a teenage party. First off, you cannot be a parent and not have seen or heard of a teenage party. We've seen parties, and I've read articles where it has led to students' deaths, in car crashes as they left parties. As far as I know, as of now, and I'm not going to talk about details, that didn't happen here.
Now, after that 45 seconds of sheer stupidity that came out of that guy's mouth, in my opinion, he should be removed from the school board immediately. I mean, he's actually trying to conflate two completely different things. It's one thing for a teen to have had a house party while his parents are out of town. Hell, it's one thing for a teen to have a house party and maybe his parents were there. But in this case, it's completely different when the teen has a house party and you're the employee. You're the principal, no less. Not only allowing it to happen, but also buys the alcohol and helps them set the damn party up. And then this guy says, well, no one was killed here. And to that I say, by the grace of God, no one was killed. There's no telling how many of those teens got behind the wheel drunk that night. We know of at least one. Now, I came across a comment that was made on a post while researching this case, and I found it interesting because it was from Brodigan's neighbor, and it was clarifying some things that were made in the comments of this post. So just bear with me. I'm going to read you the exact quote word for word. "This is the principal of my child's school. She also happens to be our neighbor. She has 2 teenage sons who have been hosting wild parties almost every weekend for the past few months. The gatherings involve kids ages 13 to 18. There are not any elementary school children attending the party." And she put "not" in all caps. And she continues on, "Initially, she would usually shut the parties down by 11 p.m. However, over the last few weekends, the loud music has continued well into the early morning hours. Although the police have been called to her house before, this was the first time alcohol was so blatantly involved. On the night in question, the principal wasn't at her home the entire time. She was down the street at another neighbor's house. The police called her and instructed her to shut down the house party, but she did not comply. When officers arrived, they discovered alcohol, marijuana, and even a firearm being used by the teenagers. I actually spoke with her the morning of her arrest. She seemed completely normal, almost as if she had no idea what was about to happen later on that day. Needless to say, our entire neighborhood is still in shock over the situation and cannot comprehend what on earth she was thinking." And my answer to that is she wasn't thinking. When you wonder why these teenagers just don't seem to get it these days, it's because they have parents who have zero control over them, or they want to be the cool parents. And this time it's going to cost those parents something. It won't be as major as everyone's thinking, but they're going to have to pay some money for this, and they're going to have to do some community service, etc. And look, it may cost them their careers in the end. So there you have it. Currently, there's nothing else to report on this case, but I'll keep you posted. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate the podcast wherever you listen. We drop episodes throughout the week. And look, you can be alerted to our new drops just by subscribing wherever you listen. It doesn't cost you anything, but it'll give you a little alert, a notification every time a new episode is dropped. That comes in especially handy when we do these emergency drops on days that we don't normally drop episodes. And until next time, for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.